Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Office Hours. My name is Apurva Ashok. I'm from the Rebus community, and I'm really excited to be welcoming you all to a summer session of Office Hours. I know we took June off, but we're back. We're excited to chat about a really interesting topic today. But before diving into all the details about what we'll be discussing and who our excellent speakers are, I do want to turn it over to Karen to tell you a little bit about the OEN and who's joining from the OEN today.
Thank you, Apurva. Hello, everybody. I'm Karen Lauritsen with the Open Education Network. I'm joined today by our community manager, Barb Thies, and our new digital content strategist, Tonya Johnson, and many of you who are OEN members. For those of you who are not yet a member of our community, we are a group of professionals who are advancing higher education through open education. And as Apurva said, we're all delighted that you can join us for this July session. We are going to talk about evaluating OER for accessibility today. And we are joined by three guests, although I will say that almost invariably, all of you as attendees also have much to bring to the conversation. So we invite all of you and your expertise to the conversation as well. If this is your first office hours, I'll just introduce you briefly to the format. Our three guests will talk for maybe about 5 minutes with their experience evaluating OER for accessibility. And then Apurva and I will look to all of you to drive the conversation with your questions, your comments, your stories from the field. And so we really look forward to hearing from you shortly. So without further ado, I will introduce you to our three speakers and then turn things over to them. We are joined today by Tiffany Tejerina, Affordable Learning Georgia Program Manager. Also, Elena Osbacht, Health Sciences Librarian and Assistant Professor at the University of Nevada, Reno Libraries, and Elle Demopoulos, Assistive Technology Specialist at the College of Marin. So our three guests are going to talk about evaluating OER. We've spent previous sessions talking about creating accessible OER. And so now we're going to talk about it after it's been created and potential remediation strategies and so on. So Tiffany, I will hand things to you to kick us off.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Like she said, my name is Tiffany Tejerina, and I am the program manager for Affordable Learning Georgia, which is the University System of Georgia's affordability initiative. Over the past year and a half since joining Affordable Learning Georgia, one of the primary functions of my job has been to lead our accessibility efforts. And so since then, we've created training tutorials for making things accessible. We've added new requirements to our grant programs. We've started a migration of all of our materials to Manifold, which is a more accessible platform and an opportunity to create even more accessibility. And we've added a new emphasis on providing support for the creation of accessible OER. And so I'm going to put this link in the chat. Unless Jeff beats me to it, because that's what he does. Yep.
I think I gotcha.
So, but more recently, we have actually released a new evaluation rubric for evaluating the accessibility of OER, whether you created it or are adopting it. And you can also find that on the accessibility page. The OER accessibility evaluation rubric is available as an online form and also a fill and printable Word document. And it looks at 3 different areas of accessibility: open access, digital access, and pedagogical access. So in the open access section, you're looking at access and usability at the very basic level of openness. So we're looking at things like downloadability, printability, responsive design, login requirements, things like that, convertibility. Then in the digital access section, that's where we're looking at the more traditional concepts of accessibility. So there's sort of a summarized set of standards there based on WCAG 2.0 web accessibility design guidelines. And then finally, in the pedagogical access section, you're challenged to consider accessibility at the pedagogical level. So in that section, and it's a little bit shorter of a section, But we're looking at the availability of self-assessment activities. So activities that students can use before they submit graded assignments that would encourage them to basically practice ahead of time and to assess themselves. And then also the encouragement of universal design practices, which a lot of the time we think of universal design for learning in more of a like how the students access the materials way. But in this in the rubric, we're also encouraging you to look at whether look at how students are engaging with and applying those materials. And I think that step, that sort of making that step from just how they access it to also how they engage with and apply it is a really important part of making OER fully accessible. So that's, I mean, that's what we have been doing at ALG with accessibility. The rubric is really new. It's only been used by a few people so far, but I know it's making the rounds. I've had a few people get in touch with me to ask questions about it. So it's just really exciting, a new resource to use. So I will end there. I don't know how long I took, but.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's great to hear about the new rubric and look forward to hearing more during the discussion. Elena, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm a health sciences librarian, and so primarily how I intersect with OERs and accessibility is mostly I help instructors if they're wanting to create something or find something they can use in their class to make the situation more affordable. And then also if we want to add something to our collections and promote it directly to students, we have to make sure, of course, it's accessible. And at my institution, we were slapped with a huge lawsuit. So everyone's really on board to, in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise, about making things accessible. And my coworker, who's not here, she's on vacation, so I'm representing us both, is really big in working with OERs and accessibility. And she kind of brought me into a project where we got grant funding from the Association of College and Research Libraries to kind of we want to get a better idea of what sort of issues people are having with open textbooks and accessibility. So we got a grant, we hired a student assistant, and we found a random sample of about 355 open textbooks in various formats. So EPUBs, PDFs, just, HTML files, and some Word documents. And we created a rubric based on WCAG 2.1. Not everything on there, mostly we stuck to AA things and some elements from the AAA category. And basically we had our student, and we did part of this ourselves. For each of our books, we took the first 20 pages or first chapter, and we assessed it using a variety of tools to see if they met those categories. And there are about 14, 15 categories, 15 altogether, but some didn't apply to every format. And on average, each book kind of failed in about 7 of those categories, about 50%. And some of the things that the books kind of really struggled with were things just like having alt text for images. Tables was a big problem, correctly formatting that. So it kind of gave us an idea of the sorts of things authors were struggling with in terms of making their books accessible. And we did kind of learn a little bit about the formats. There wasn't a huge variation. PDFs definitely have the most problems for sure. And EPUBs were a little bit easier to deal with. But what was interesting is we ended up using way more tools than we thought we were going to need to do this. We have a whole list of them, and I can share that later with you. We're going to be publishing the results of our study in Insights, which is a UK-based open access journal. And we're going to link out to our data if you want to see it, and our rubric and all the tools that we used. But we really didn't really know too much about EPUBs and how to assess them. So we really learned a lot from that. And we used Ace by Daisy and Calibre, which is actually an EPUB editor, because we just couldn't do stuff with some of the regular tools that we had. And then in certain cases, to kind of emphasize how something that we learned was that automatic checking tools obviously aren't enough. Certain things where we thought would be really straightforward to figure out if it was considered accessible, we couldn't. And so we ended up having to just use a lot of like Mac voiceover, for example, just to read part of the book out to us and see what actually happened live, because it was unclear from the tools we were using whether or not the little bits of the books we saw were accessible. So it's a very interesting project, a little disheartening to find out that, you know, very few books actually hit a lot of the very basic standards set out by WCAG. But I think ultimately what we learned is that, you know, we try to focus on things that were not in that was set by the platforms, but that features that the authors had control over. But it was kind of really unclear who had control over certain things. Is it, you know, something that the platform should be, the publisher should be looking at? Is it something the authors are in charge of? And then a lot of these authors are obviously people at academic institutions who don't have a lot of resources and support. So we were kind of hoping to learn, like, where's the best place to direct instructors? So how can we as a library, for example, we often support these kind of things. How can we kind of build more support, you know, if we don't have a lot of money to do that? And, you know, what areas are authors really struggling with? And it seems like just basic support is necessary, but where does that come in? Is it like, do we use a checklist before we help someone publish, or, you know, how do we set that up? So we're still kind of talking about that. So if you have a process for that, that'd be great to hear about. But yeah, I think it was a very exciting project, and I'm hoping to learn more about some of the tools, like I said, that we ended up using, since they were very new to me at the time. But if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer what I can about that.
Thanks so much, Elena. It's fun to hear how, you know, this very specific study that you embarked on led to these broad questions that we all wrestle with in OER publishing. So thank you. Elle, over to you.
Hello, I work for the College of Marin. One of the current projects that we're working on is the Cal ECHO grant. So part of that process, it involves the creation, as I'm a co-author and designer, of a to Z anti-racist discipline survey textbook, basically, or a reader in a sense. And part of that project relies on teaming up students either through service learning placements or through federal work study through the grant that connect us with our authors, whether they be faculty or subject matter experts, and really thinking about, you know, having that student voice come through in our OER. And part of that training process is creating materials that actually not only set up a rubric for basic accessibility testing, but really including that as part of a larger, you know, examination of what access really means, right? Including anti-racist pedagogy and methodology, you know, looking at access as far as not only us coming from a programming perspective and background like I do, looking at the technical ins and outs using some of the great tools that have already been mentioned, but also looking at how students interact and engage and how you can scale those efforts up, right? I think that's one of the things that is missing in a lot of our OER creation and remediation. How easy is it to edit and then format shift that, right? Because, you know, it's one thing to look at a piece of OER and evaluate it for content, but how easy is it to format shift it or to edit it or to remix it, right? That's one of the biggest strengths of OER, is that remixability, right? So the easier it is to remix that, to make different versions of that. Say you want a live HTML textbook with H5P, great. If you want to turn that into an EPUB, great. You want to make an audiobook of that, awesome. You want to integrate that into a Canvas cartridge, perfect. But how easy is that process? And we can kind of develop those trainings, not only for content creators, but also our co-creators, like our students. And we've built out some self-training courses that align those goals, right? So I don't know if you've ever had the experience of trying to read or even creatively edit a 300-page InDesign or a PDF file. It's no day at the dentist, but it's certainly not a walk in the park either. So thinking about those types of approaches, I think it's also good, and we try to stress this in our trainings, not only with, again, content creators, but our co-creators like students or designers, accessibility, subject matter experts, is testing, right? I think sometimes we skip that audience and user testing part. And, sometimes it's really easy to tell students and our faculty and content creators, hey, try to turn off your monitor and see if you can navigate that textbook, right, with NVDA or a Mac VoiceOver, right? Or use Screen Curtain if you have a tablet or an iPhone, right? Thinking about those things, or just put your mouse aside, see if you can navigate it with just a keyboard. That'll give you a really good indication that's very easy to train for and really provide a visceral feedback than, say, trying to train every faculty member, every student on the exact nature of WCAG and exactly how tags work in Adobe Acrobat, right? So that's some of the things that we've been working on here. And, I can post some of the resources. We're going to be publishing our work as CC BY, both of our trainings and the OER textbook we mentioned. And part of that process includes our work print and our rubric of how we got to that point. So it'll include all that really nice field work and descriptions of how we went along and went through that process. So hopefully it can be replicated. That's all I got for now. I'd love to hear folks' questions and comments.
Thank you, Al, and thanks in advance for sharing some of those resources with us. I can immediately see what you mean about the strengths of more fundamental sort of thought or actual experiments of, okay, try this without a mouse versus, why don't I direct you to the WCAG website so you can review all of the requirements. So thank you, Tiffany and Elena also. So we've heard from our three guests now. And so now we'd like to hear from all of you attendees about what you're working on or questions you may have for the guests. Todd, I see your hand there. Feel free to unmute.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm wondering, most of my experience with the accessibility for digital resources is not with OER, but with databases that we pay for. And I have yet to come across a database that is 100% compliant with the 2.0 AA standards, which is what we've been applying. I'm curious to know whether you have been using a 100% standard, and if you have some OER that does not, say, meet all of the criteria of the 2.0 AA standards, do you just not use it? Are you willing to accept something slightly less than 100%? What has your own standard been with regard to that?
That's a great question, Todd. I'm going to invite any of our three guests to jump in and share their experiences first.
Well, I can say, working at the library, the databases have been a big issue for us, and I say it's not resolved yet. I think the general rule here has been, we try to, for anything that we officially promote, we try to make sure it's as compliant as we can get it. But I know individual faculty, what they'll do is they'll find something that's mostly good and they'll just link out to it. So it's not like embedded in a Canvas course, so we don't catch it or whatever. And they just kind of fly under the radar that way. I do know that happens.
Yeah, and I can kind of jump in and add to that. As someone with a programming background, I really, relate to that question. If you're thinking about, SQL databases or ERMs or any of those types of things, right? We often don't think about the tools that we use to create that kind of content or to manage our databases or to manage our students or our caseloads or whatever we're doing on a day-to-day to increase, student success or whatever your goals are. I would say that looking at it from a strictly 100% like checklist mentality, it might not be a very effective strategy. I would say more, you would get more traction if you look at it from a, there's nothing that's going to be 100% accessible to everyone, right? But the beauty of OER is that it's changeable, it's remixable. So the more open it is, the more easily editable it is, the more you can format shift it, right? The more you can change and edit how that interface works, customizing an interface for a digital asset management system, for example, right? Making those different types of user configurations and interfaces possible. Then you can say, oh, well, that PDF might not be accessible for me, or that interface might not be accessible, but it's also available in EPUB. It's also available as a live HTML book, right? So thinking about that, I think, is a more effective learning strategy than, really trying to adhere to a 100% standard for everyone. I know that's a great goal, but I think it's a perspective, not a finish line.
I mean, and I think I kind of, I'm like sitting here nodding at everything that Elle is saying, because that's kind of a similar, it's a similar approach to how we look at the OER too, is like, how do we make this particular one as accessible as it can be? And if that means providing it in multiple formats, then that's what we're going to do. It's not always possible to make it 100% accessible, at least in our capacity. It might be at, it may be possible with additional help that we don't have yet, or that we have not had the chance to explore yet. But in our capacity as two people that run this OER repository, we basically do as accessible as we can and provide as many formats as we can. And when we get requests for something specific, then we do the best we can to actually to provide that as well.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I really latched on to what Elle said earlier about this not being a finish line. I think, even if you do get to that 100% standard or point, part of thinking about incorporating accessibility into your workflow means being ready to change and adapt, because user needs might change, student needs might change. Someone might come to you with something that had never been discussed before and that you might need to think about accommodating. So looking for whether it's tools or designing your content in a way that is easy for it to either be modified or adapted based on what those needs might be, I think will be important. And Todd, hopefully that helps. I'm going to invite others who might have other suggestions for Todd to drop them into the chat as well, or any questions. I might also add, Todd, it's also worth thinking about, in terms of software in particular, the organization that might be creating the software. There are a lot of organizations, especially that maybe are more focus on creating open source software, that might be prioritizing changes to their tools to improve accessibility. So that might also be a factor when you're considering what databases or softwares to use, in addition to just looking out for how compliant they might be to existing standards. What is the responsiveness and willingness to make changes on the fly? And I'm seeing a lot of conversation in the chat, so I'm going to pause and let anyone else who has a question either away or drop in. Jeff, was that you with another question?
No. You were saying there was a lot of chat and sorry, I just had a block of chat.
Don't worry about it. As Karen said, this is really the time where we turn things over to you all to share your experiences, to ask your questions, and to continue this conversation. Maybe while folks are thinking about questions or comments they might have, I'll pose one to our three guests, which is, I might take us back to even something simpler. If you're thinking about searching for OER in repositories, which is the route a lot of people go through, what are some quick tips or strategies you might suggest people keep in mind as part of that search workflow or discovery workflow? Elena, I know you spoke a little bit about looking for OER as part of your big study. What you discovered about that process that either could have been improved or was already working quite well?
I mean, I think familiarizing yourself with the different search tools and platforms out there, getting familiar with platforms that you like and might go back to. And also just, I mean, sometimes when I work with faculty who are interested in finding something, if I can find OERs that have been reviewed by someone else in their discipline or reviewed by other faculty members, that can be helpful too, but that's not always something that's available in different platforms.
Thank you. That's helpful to keep in mind. Tiffany, when you were putting together that rubric, was there anything that you had geared specifically during the discovery phase? I'm thinking a lot of those open access sort of criteria around, are the formats available? Does it meet these particular technological considerations? Might be helpful to look at first before doing the deep dive into the pedagogy section. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so that first section of the rubric, it's really looking like you want to be looking at, whether students have to have like a login, because that creates a barrier to access. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna be inaccessible, but it does sort of create that extra barrier. And then there's also, things, just the availability of the different formats. Are they present, or is it possible to convert to different formats? Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I think just like the simple ability to download the thing is super helpful too.
Related to that, Tiffany, I know this is very early days with your rubric, but I'm wondering if you have enough information to say whether which of the three areas, the open access, digital access, and pedagogical access, which of those three is kind of either the best. Sorry, I'm having trouble thinking of a less hierarchical term, and which sort of is open for the most improvement or development.
As far as actually, I guess, are you referring to like within the rubric itself, or like the OER that are being evaluated? Usually
the OER that are being evaluated, like, oh, you can already perhaps see a trend that they're strong when it comes to digital access, but open access, they're leaving something to be desired. Or do you think that's even a fair evaluation in using the rubric? Perhaps not.
It really hasn't been used enough to be able to tell. There's really only, I think, like 5 or 6 people that have submitted the form, because we just released it like a week or 2 ago. And so, yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, honestly. If I had to take a guess, I would assume that the pedagogy section will probably be on the lower end, just because not all, there are quite a lot of OER out there that just simply don't have activities and things embedded into them. And so that sort of that leaves room for that piece of improvement. And then probably behind that would probably be the open access piece, the downloadability, the printability and things like that. But that's purely just based on me sort of thinking through how I expect it to look, not necessarily how it actually looks.
Sure. Thank you. Speaking of Jeff's comments in the chat, I wonder if any of you can sort of speak to collaborations across departments when it comes to evaluating OER, if indeed that's happening. Each of you, best I can tell, is in a slightly different position at your institution. And so I'm just curious if you feel like you have partners in this. If it does come to, an adoption of an OER that doesn't quite meet standards, are there collaborators that you've been working with on these various projects?
So I'm at a system level, so we have hands in all of our institutions, and so there's definitely collaboration there. Just purely working at with teams at each institution. But when it comes to finding when there's a resource that needs to be made accessible for whether it's for a particular student or just in general. It kind of depends. I mean, sometimes the institution has a particular office that they're directed to, and that office will help them, or their instructional designers will help. But then we also have an office or a center for, oh gosh, Jeff, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to remind me there you go, CIDI.
It's Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, but it really functions as the system-wide kind of server of disability services offices throughout all of the campuses. Not only that, but they also are contracted out to do a lot of external work. They are often the ones that provide accessibility assistance to major textbook publishers. So we learned a lot from them. We haven't been in an active partnership lately, mostly because Tiffany's been taking on this really cool faculty accessibility training and setting standards that meets our initiative's goals a lot more than just taking this entirely different center and saying, hey, could you do all our work for us there?
Right, yeah, and the Center for Inclusive Design Innovation, from what I have understood with various faculty, when they work with them, it's their projects tend to be very much on a case-by-case basis. When a student needs something specific, that's when they're sort of called in. And so they're super helpful resource on that. And then beyond that, just looking at making things in general more accessible, it tends to be more the institution's offices or like faculty training, things like that. So yeah.
Could any of you speak a bit more to the types of training you offer? I know, Elle, you said that the thing that you like to stress in your training with both content creators as well as students is testing. What do the trainings typically look like? Are there big challenges that you've sort of seen in running them multiple times, common questions that folks have maybe around tools or something else?
Sure. Thinking about Karen's question about collaboration, I want to stress that, not only do we have a lot of cross-departmental and going across the aisle, so to speak, to different shareholders and stakeholders in our college campus, just directly here at the College of Marin, but we also have some very excellent collaborators through the California Community College System, our consortium for CC Echo, College of the Canyons, and other folks, namely, and they've developed some great trainings that'll be available through the grant. We also have a lot of really interesting, as I said, projects in the works for that co-creation, right? So part of that training, really thinking about co-creation as, the first hurdle usually when I hear from content creators is, well, I don't want a student to evaluate the content for subject matter expertise, right? Because I'm the subject matter expert. Well, I'm like, well, actually, the student is there to lend their voice, to really think about and give you that insight about how they access it, right? That's the person that gives you the, well, if I'm going to download it on my phone and read it, because this is how I access content, maybe I don't have great Wi-Fi. Maybe I live in a place where I have to go to the public library and use their Wi-Fi. How are those things really impacting the workflow that you won't necessarily think about? And it's a lot easier to include that kind of user interface, user experience concepts into the trainings, and like really think about really the visceral day-to-day, how we're interfacing with that content. And to add to one of our other comments today, how can we then use our creativity to extend that, right? If it's easily editable and easily extendable and can scale up, then you can start adding those activities, because there's a lot of great OER out there that has great content, but might not have the the anti-racist piece or the H5P piece or any of these interactives, right? So that's one of the things that I kind of stressed. The easier it is for you to edit and include those contents and really hone in on that meaning making and making it your own, it's by its very nature going to be more accessible, right? So I think also conversely, that side of the student training piece, that is an easier ask for faculty to be like, well, actually, if they're really just giving their voice and giving their perspective and really putting that training piece together, and then I, as the content creator and the faculty, are actually evaluating it for content, right? That's an easier ask than say, hey, your student is going to go out and pull some OERs for you and filter it down for it. You can obviously do that, but I think that kind of co-working process is easier when you assign those roles and you kind of integrate that process going forward. And I think it'll make the rest of your, I know some instructional designers are on here, it'll make the rest of your course design more accessible, right? Because you're thinking about how users, or students in this case, step through your course, right? How are they engaging with it? What's their workflow, right? How are they, what kind of technology are they using, or are they used to? So like thinking about those types of items, I think is great. So really honing in on that training piece where you can more easily focus less on the content creation or the subject matter expertise piece. Obviously leave that to the faculty or whoever's the author, but it's easier to make those separate trainings for the students to kind of have that co-work voice, right? Another thing, I think, getting to the second part of your question, I do a lot of flex workshops, like I know some of us all do. And one of the things I'm excited about coming up in the fall is a flex workshop I have entitled, maybe too cheekily, PDFs and you, or subtitled PDFs, what are they good for, right? So like, I know there was a conversation on some of the listservs that were more library specific, asking about, how are we, if you're in that discipline, in that field as librarians, really thinking about the accessibility of our PDFs, our journals, right? And what do we want to do about that? And the first question I always ask to that is the same I ask to faculty who want to default to PDFs for everything. Why? Why are we using PDFs, right? I mean, I have no problem with using PDFs if you can explain to me why you're using it, right? Is there some benefit you're getting out of it? Because if there is, great, tell me. I want to learn, right? I'm here to learn with you. But if there isn't, and it's just quote unquote the default, well, there are lots of other formats that are open, lots of other tools that are open, right? You mentioned Calibre and some other DAISY tools, that those are open and free, right? To use Acrobat Professional, you have to have a license for that. And so again, thinking about those open versus closed formats, OER as in free as in speech, right? So just a few things for folks to kind of riff on, and I'll leave it there and let other people join in.
Thank you, Elle. That sounds like a really fantastic training. And I know in the chat, folks are asking if you have links to some of these workshops. Can they follow up? And I also appreciate how you not only flagged the technical accessibility pieces that we ought to be thinking about, but really focusing on why these matter, thinking about the student experience. So I really love the emphasis on those points. Speaking of tools, I know I'm curious about this, and Elena, you have mentioned ACE by DAISY and Calibre. Could you describe some of the tools that you've used? I know others mentioned NVDA or VoiceOver or Screen Carton. For someone who might never have heard of these tools before, what are they? And for someone who is brand new to them, how might they slowly incorporate these into their evaluation workflows?
I actually have a list of some of the stuff that we use pulled up. So Calibre was one I mentioned that we use to kind of evaluate EPUBs. And if you know some HTML, it's fairly easy to pick up. I mean, there is a bit of a learning curve. Basically what it is just a free tool that people can use to edit and modify EPUB. So you can download the file and kind of go in and you can use it to change and change the EPUBs that you have too if you're modifying a work out there. And then ACE by DAISY is kind of just like a free kind of checking tool. It'll read through any EPUBs that you've downloaded and are using. Of course, we ended up having to use Adobe Acrobat Pro for PDFs. I'd say we use the color contrast analyzer, which is a free little tool. It's fairly easy to use. You kind of drag and drop the tool into the background and foreground colors of anything you're looking at. Siteimprove is what we use here for websites, HTML, so that's what we use. And then, yeah, the screen readers, NVDA and VoiceOver are both used depending on what kind of machine we're using.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview. Tiffany, was there anything else that you wanted to add to the list of tools, maybe ones that folks might be using as they're working through your rubric?
You know, a lot of the resource creation that comes out of ALG is done just with standard Microsoft Word. And so, I mean, so we do give them a resource on how to use the accessibility checker there. And also with the same thing for the Adobe one. We give them the is it WebAIM or but an online HTML checker as well. But yeah, so like Jeff said in the chat, it's mostly because it works well with Manifold to use the Word documents. But we are seeing a little bit more of an increase on of people creating in HTML, because that also works with Manifold and provides for more opportunities for engagement within Manifold, because you can sort of embed things in there and just like have more stuff going on. So yeah, I mean, most of the tools are pretty standard stuff. It's not a whole lot of we don't really see as many tools that you don't hear about as often, I guess. There you go. Wave is what I was trying to think of for the HTML web checker.
Tiffany, you may have mentioned this, and I apologize if so, but are your authors working in Manifold? Are they sort of directly logging in and creating content in that way, or are they creating it elsewhere and then your project team brings it into Manifold for them? How's that going?
Kind of both right now. So we do have some teams that are, excited to learn learn how to use this new platform. And so those teams, we'll have them create an account, we'll give them access to their project, and then we'll teach them how to use it. But for the most part, it is people creating accessible Word documents or accessible HTML packages, and we just ingest it for them. So Jeff put a link in the chat here. We created a basic template for people creating in Word for Manifold. Just something to start them out at least on creating an accessible document. We're planning on also adding to that. So this one's a single document template. So for shorter books, basically, but we also want to create templates for bigger books that involve multiple documents, and also for HTML. Eventually, we'll probably also do EPUB, but I have less experience with EPUB, so.
Mm-hmm. And so it looks like, clicking on the link that Jeff dropped in, it looks like the template focuses a bit on hierarchy and heading levels. Are there other things sort of nested in there that cue your content creators? For example, we touched on how tables are often a problem, and how creating alt tags for images is often a problem. Is there a way that you can cue your content creators in this template, or is that kind of a separate instructional piece?
So we do in that template talk about images and adding alternative text. We also talk about videos and captioning, creating accessible descriptive links, things like page breaks and use, I guess we also talk about things that they shouldn't necessarily spend too much time on, because Manifold will just kind of scrap what they did. So it's like spending too much time on fonts and colors and things isn't going to matter, because Manifold's going to overwrite that. But I don't think, it doesn't look like we have. Okay, so we actually do have a section in there on fancy formatting for tables, basically saying don't do it. Because Manifold is going to recreate it into a super simple basic table, and it's probably going to mess up what your table is supposed to be showing. And so we sort of just encourage them to stick to very basic, no merging cells and things like that. Stick to standard, like a heading or a header row, maybe a header column if you need it, and keep it basic.
Very cool. Thank you. Elle or Elena, is there anything you'd like to add related to this? We're about 10 minutes from the hour, so this is when we typically start wrapping up. So if there are questions that you've been holding on to, or comments that you wanted to make, now is a great time to jump in.
I wanted to add to when we were talking about the training piece and sort of the approach to training. One thing that we have tried to focus on is in our tutorials that we've created on how to make things accessible. We really focus on making sure that they're directed to a faculty audience, and so they're not expecting the faculty member to be the perfect accessible expert, where it really they're written for someone who wants to make their stuff accessible and doesn't really want to know too much more about it. Because a lot of the time too much information is what discourages people from actually pursuing accessibility. It's like if they're thrown too much stuff, throw too much information at them, throw too much stuff at them, then suddenly they're overwhelmed and they just don't want to do it anymore.
think we could all relate to that feeling, not just in an accessibility context. Michelle,
you mentioned alt tags and alt text, and I'm just thinking back to our exercise and our webinar, Karen, that we did. The OEN generously invited me to do a workshop on alt tags and accessibility, and it was really a great experience. And some of the takeaways I know both myself and our audience had were that the automated tools, especially some of the AI tools that are going to be built into Microsoft Word and some of these other content management systems, they're a great start, but they can't really accurately describe what the content is doing within the scope of the document, right? So, if you have a picture of a cat, right? You can describe that 3 ways, depending on if it's a biology textbook, a veterinary textbook, a history of, Italian art textbook, right? That it's really about not necessarily describing what the content image is, but more about what its instructional material is doing, right? And that, I think, leads into that whole idea of, fancy tables, right? People want to use tables for layout sometimes because it looks nicer, it looks cleaner, right? But what is that table really doing? What's the informational, content and quality of that table, right? So if I can make it simpler, right? If I can make it more concise, just like we, I know a lot of us are have English backgrounds here, a lot of us say, hey, if you can make your writing more concise, it's going to be more clear, right? Why say in 50 words what you can say in 10 words, right? So that's kind of really harkening back to also that accessibility point of, try to make it simple. Don't get into the weeds of metadata standards, right? The best camera you have is the camera in your pocket. The best accessibility tool you have are the tools that are built in to whatever platform you're using.
Agreed. And as Anne also echoes in the chat, it's important to teach towards those practices in the creation process, because when you come down to checking, it's much more difficult and overwhelming to fix. And I think, Elena, you flagged how in your research you were going back to some of those workflows and saying, okay, what needs to be changed when? Who can be responsible for doing some of this work to avoid the unnecessary remediation later on in the process?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the issues we saw were things that, if someone was thinking about it as they were making something and had a plan for it, it would not be as difficult to deal with than when you're getting to it at the end where you're trying to modify it yourself or you're checking on it. And you have to learn a different program and take the EPUB apart and redo different things. So if there's a way you could encourage people the content creators to build that into their workflow, or find ways, we're thinking about ways to kind of get at them when they're at that stage and how to do that, how to present ourselves during that stage.
Definitely. And Karen, I see you're jumping in with a form, so I might give you a minute or two to explain what the form is and how we can continue this conversation maybe on evaluating and building accessibility into our workflows in the future.
Absolutely. To Elena's comment, we've often talked about planning for accessibility, having a mindset when you go into content creation, and that's certainly preferable to looking backwards with a checklist and taking a remediation approach. But of course, things are created in so many different ways, and we want to explore all those different ways with you, but we need your help. So let us know what you'd like to talk about in upcoming office hour sessions, people you may want to hear from, upcoming papers or rubrics, things that are happening in the open education space and you think would be great to explore together in office hours. We appreciate your eyes and ears and your suggestions so that what I hope is a concise form using only the number of words required has been dropped into the chat. And I would like to, on behalf of Apurva and the OEN team, thank our guests, Tiffany, Elle, and Elena, for joining us today, and all of you for attending right here in the middle of summer. We appreciate your questions and your comments and helpful links in the chat. And with that, I will say farewell and turn things over to Apurva.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'll also echo my thanks to all of our guests and also all of you attendees for contributing your questions, your reflections, your thoughts, resources, and other things in the conversation. It's always a pleasure to co-host office hours with the Open Education Network. And we look forward to seeing you all next month to tackle another topic and maybe to continue this conversation on accessibility in the future. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.